Let's change tack a little bit now, and President Cyril Ramaphosa has told Parliament South Africa is in recovery. He was responding to the SONA debate. However, it seems when it comes to food security in poor communities, there is little to no progress. According to the South African Child Gauge 2020 report, child stunting in the country remains the same as it was 22 years ago. The report also found that lockdown has contributed to the hunger crisis in the country. Let's chat some more about this with Professor Julian May from the Centre of Excellence in Food Security. He was one of the principal researchers in this. Prof, very good morning, and thanks so much for your time. Just looking at a glance at the outcomes, or some of the outcomes of the child gauge, the report describing the deteriorating nutritional status of young children. You've called it the slow violence of malnutrition. Quite a loaded description. Tell us what you mean by that.
Yes, the idea of slow violence actually comes from people working in climate change, where they're talking about hidden, slow and permanent changes which have quite extreme negative outcomes. It's been applied to malnutrition, and we've applied it specifically to the malnutrition of children. And the reason for this is that the events that take place for a child from the womb till its pre-adolescence are fundamental to that child's development. When a child experiences acute malnutrition, and about a quarter of our children do experience acute malnutrition, the impact is permanent. It affects not simply the height of a child. We often talk about levels of stunting. Reports have described South Africa's children as being short and fat. But actually, it's more fundamental than that. It affects the development of the child's immune system, absolutely critical when we face a COVID crisis, the motor system, as well as the cognitive ability system.
So, I mean, and we've also been told for so long, Prof, and we know for a fact that nutrition and education and the ability to learn as well are so closely, they're so tied in, that one would also have to ask what has happened in terms of just the education as well of these children and their ability to move forward.
Well, I'm glad that you were previously talking to the matriculants, and it's extremely positive that the matriculants have done so well. But the concern is that so many children don't actually make matric. So significant numbers of our children start school, but do not in fact complete it. And so the matric results are those that were fortunate enough to get all that way. We know well that a hungry child is a child that finds it difficult to concentrate, finds it difficult to be able to manage the pace with teaching is taking place now, and doubtless were the children that found it most difficult to make the transition during this last year, where they've had to learn in a virtual classroom. So that's exactly the kind of problem which we are concerned about. It's about affecting the future generations of South Africans.
And tell us more about the impact of COVID and lockdown on exactly what we're talking about, the nutritional status of children as well. Because when we talk about undernourished children, it doesn't necessarily mean we're looking for an emaciated-looking child. Obesity as well is a problem.
That's correct. So a child may be emaciated. More typically in South Africa, our children do not necessarily look emaciated, but they will be below the height that we would expect them to be at that age band. So that is the first thing. Then, as you say, obesity is an important issue. If a child has experienced a nutritional shock, if it's had a period where there has not been enough nutrition, then the child is also predisposed to putting on weight, to becoming overweight and obese. And again, the adolescent that is overweight and obese is also more likely to produce a child when she gives birth that will also be stunted. So it becomes an intergenerational problem, passing from mother to child. So those are among the kinds of concerns that we raise in this report and refer to it as a slow violence.
And I suppose COVID and lockdown exacerbated all of that, because we're looking at not being able to get food to many of these children. Many of them go to school, to some schools, for the feeding scheme. They know that they're going to be getting one meal at least for the day. And then on the other hand, we had others who were sitting in front of a screen or sort of just not doing anything and just eating whatever was around as well. So it seems COVID has had that kind of impact on them as well.
It certainly has. At the launch yesterday, we were addressed by a student activist who is concerned about what has been happening in her school and has been involved in attempts to try and address the school feeding program. So it was of great concern that the school feeding was halted, and it is also of concern that the various responses have started to come to an end. The top-up grants that we were hoping would last longer, those are the kinds of things that also we need to be concerned about. Our estimates suggest that about 2.7 million children, additional children, experienced hunger during the COVID period. Now, at this stage, we don't have the data to know how many of those experience hunger to the point of malnourishment. But certainly, this points to a potential crisis in the future as those children further grow, having experienced bouts of hunger.
So, Prof, I suppose the question now is, what do we do about it? We've identified the problems, and it's not new, like you say. It just seems to be getting worse. We know the problems, but we know that they're getting worse. Who needs to do what?
Okay, so in the report, we're calling for 3 major measures. The first is to increase the child support grant to at least the level of the food poverty line in South Africa, so that we can ensure that the caregivers of children are getting enough money, in fact, to be able to give those children a nourishing diet. At the moment, the money that is available simply isn't enough to be able to afford healthy food. The second, we have a national nutrition and food security plan in South Africa. The plan calls for the establishment of a food council, and the council is supposed to be intersectoral across different levels of government, different departments of government, as well as across different spheres of government, as well as to involve the private sector and civil society. At the moment, we have some sort of a coordinating authority which is specifically only within government, and we would like to see that the food councils be established, and not only established at a national level, but that we establish food councils down to the level of a municipality. Municipalities have considerable resources which they can use to be able to deal with food security. And we saw some municipalities responding better than others during COVID. So that is the second thing, that we establish our food council.
And then lastly, sorry, yes, do go on.
And lastly, the Constitution guarantees the absolute right of children to nutrition. And we would like to see government now prepare a roadmap so that we can see how they're going to marshal all the different resources, the different programs to achieve that constitutional right.
And Prof, as if that isn't challenging enough, it's also very telling that you've also found the evidence pointing to sort of the link between poverty, food insecurity, domestic violence and common mental disorders. And here you bring in how this affects the actual mother. While we concentrate on the child, we tend not to worry so much about the moms, and how a lot of them who are single moms as well, who are in charge of nutrition of their children, like you say, and this basically have to face all of these challenges to put a plate of food in front of their kids, a decent plate of food.
Absolutely. Again, yesterday at the launch, we heard one of our researchers talk to the qualitative work that she did with women and how women attempted to feed their children during COVID. Her respondents talked about depression. They talked about the anxiety of not knowing how to feed a child. They said children are hungry all the time, and when they're at home, they're demanding food all the time, so food gets run out. And they also talked about their concerns about their partners. They mentioned that there was a real concern that they were dealing with men who had lost their jobs and men who started to feel useless. So there were a range of issues that came out there that showed how COVID exacerbated some of the problems of poverty and unemployment that we already had in South Africa.
And also very shocking to hear that these women are less likely, those who've lost their jobs, than men to benefit from the UIF and COVID-19 relief grant. That's worrying and shocking.
Yes, that is indeed shocking. That is a deep concern. And again, it brings us to why does this happen? And why do we feel that we need a report such as the Child Gauge to draw attention to children? Unfortunately, children tend to be silenced. They tend not to have the voice of the youth or of the unemployed, and to be able to make their needs known. So as a result, children have tended to be neglected. We were quite concerned that the SONA made very little mention of children and child hunger, and relieved then later when President Ramaphosa, in the response to the SONA, stated that he was going to put children, South African children, at the center of all that government would do. That we welcome. That's an important step forward for us.
Well, it is the talk for now. Let's see if they walk that talk. Thanks very much, Professor Julian May.